Most people aren't ready for what I'm about to share. Joel Goldsmith's final teaching remained hidden for decades because it challenged everything we believe about healing, manifestation, and spiritual power. This isn't another feel-good message. This teaching dissolved tumors, restored broken relationships, and created financial abundance for those brave enough to apply it. But it demands you abandon every spiritual concept you've held dear. Are you prepared to let go of prayer, meditation, and affirmation? The secret lies in what Goldsmith called the great nothingness. When you truly understand this principle, you stop trying to heal, manifest, or change anything. Instead, you discover the profound truth that transforms everything without effort. But I warn you, once you see this truth, there's no going back to struggling with problems. Your entire relationship with life will shift forever. Most people prefer their familiar suffering to this radical freedom. Goldsmith discovered this teaching during his darkest hour. Facing financial ruin and serious illness, every spiritual practice had failed him. Prayer brought no relief. Meditation offered no solutions. He was ready to abandon his spiritual path entirely. Then something extraordinary happened. In a moment of complete surrender, he stopped trying to heal himself. He stopped asking God for help. He stopped believing he had any problems at all. In that instant of absolute stillness, everything changed. The illness vanished. The financial crisis resolved. But more importantly, he realized the shocking truth. There was never anything wrong in the first place. The problem was his belief in problems. The struggle was his fight against what is. This revelation became his most guarded teaching because it destroys the spiritual marketplace. When you need nothing, seek nothing, and fix nothing, what is left to sell? Only the truth of your perfect, untouchable being. Here's what makes this teaching dangerous. It reveals that every spiritual technique you've learned is actually reinforcing the very problems you're trying to solve. When you pray for healing, you affirm sickness. When you visualize abundance, you confirm lack. Goldsmith called this the trap of spiritual materialism. We use God like a cosmic vending machine, feeding it prayers and expecting miracles. But divine consciousness doesn't work for you. It works as you. There's no separation to bridge. The moment you stop trying to demonstrate supply, health, or love, they naturally express as your experience. Not because you've earned them or manifested them, but because they are the very fabric of your being. You don't get love, you are love. This understanding eliminates all spiritual effort. No more techniques, no more struggling, no more waiting for results. Just the recognition of what you already are, perfect, whole, and lacking nothing whatsoever. The great nothingness isn't emptiness. It's the absence of all human concepts about God, life, and yourself. When you stop knowing what anything means, when you release every definition and belief, something miraculous emerges from the silence. Goldsmith taught that in this space of unknowing, divine intelligence operates freely. Without your mental interference, life organizes itself perfectly. Problems dissolve because there was no one there to have problems. Needs disappear because wholeness was never absent. This isn't positive thinking or denial. It's the recognition that the human sense of life, with its struggles, needs, and limitations, is simply not true. What you are is untouchable by human experience, forever free from all conditions. Most spiritual teachers won't share this because it ends the student-teacher relationship. When you realize you are already that which you seek, what is there left to learn? The search ends in the discovery of what never began. Sarah had been battling chronic fatigue for 15 years. She'd tried every healing modality, spent thousands on treatments, and exhausted herself pursuing wellness. When she heard about Goldsmith's teaching, she was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. Instead of fighting her condition, she began practicing the great nothingness. Each morning, she would sit quietly and release every thought about her illness, every hope for healing, every fear of staying sick. She stopped identifying as a sick person seeking health. Within weeks, something shifted, not the dramatic healing she'd expected, but a profound peace with her experience. She stopped monitoring symptoms and started living fully despite fatigue. Paradoxically, as she stopped trying to get well, her energy began returning naturally. After 3 months, she realized the fatigue was gone. But more importantly, she'd discovered something greater than health, the recognition that her true self had never been touched by any condition. She was free regardless of what the body experienced. Marcus was drowning in debt, working 3 jobs just to survive. He'd practiced visualization, affirmations, and abundance techniques for years with minimal results. The harder he tried to manifest money, the deeper his financial hole became. He was ready to give up on spirituality entirely. When he learned about Goldsmith's approach, it made no sense. Stop trying to demonstrate supply? Stop seeing himself as poor? How could that possibly help? But his desperation overcame his doubt, and he committed to this radical experiment. He began each day by releasing every thought about money, bills, and financial security. Instead of affirming abundance, he practiced recognizing that his true nature lacked nothing. He stopped identifying as someone who needed more money. The transformation was subtle but profound. New opportunities appeared effortlessly. People offered help without being asked. Within 6 months, his financial situation had completely reversed, not through struggle, but through the natural flow of good that emerges when we stop blocking it. Linda's marriage was failing. 25 years together seemed to be ending in bitter divorce. She'd tried counseling, prayer treatments, and relationship workshops. Nothing was working. Her husband had already moved out and filed papers. Desperate to save her marriage, she discovered Goldsmith's teaching about the great nothingness. Instead of praying for reconciliation or trying to change her husband, she began releasing every thought about the relationship, every hope for reunion, every fear of divorce. This felt like giving up, but she persisted. She stopped seeing herself as an abandoned wife and stopped identifying her husband as the enemy. She practiced recognizing the perfect spiritual being that both of them truly were, beneath all the human drama. Within 2 months, something miraculous happened. Her husband called, confused by a sudden shift in his feelings. The anger had dissolved, the desire for divorce had vanished. They reunited, not as the same broken couple, but as 2 people who'd rediscovered their true identity beyond all human roles. These transformations share one common element: the complete cessation of human effort. When Sarah stopped trying to heal, healing happened. When Marcus stopped chasing money, abundance flowed. When Linda stopped fighting for her marriage, love returned. This is the power of the great nothingness. It removes the human will that blocks divine action. Your struggling, seeking, and striving actually prevent the very experiences you desire. Divine consciousness can only operate in the absence of human interference. The moment you stop trying to be spiritual, you discover you already are. The moment you stop seeking God, you realize God is seeking through you. This teaching is dangerous because it destroys the entire spiritual industry built on human effort and divine separation. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the great nothingness lies what Goldsmith called divine indifference. This isn't cold detachment, but the recognition that your true self remains untouched by any human experience, positive or negative. You become indifferent to both problems and demonstrations. This divine indifference eliminates the emotional roller coaster of spiritual seeking. No more celebrating healings or mourning failures. No more feeling blessed when things go well or punished when they don't. You rest in the unchanging awareness that observes all experiences without being affected. When you achieve this state, miracles become natural, not because you've earned them or deserved them, but because divine consciousness expresses itself freely without the interference of human desire or fear. Life flows effortlessly because you're not trying to direct it. Most people resist this teaching because they want to feel special about their demonstrations. They prefer the drama of problems and solutions to the peace of divine indifference. But true freedom lies in needing nothing, wanting nothing, and being satisfied with what is. Goldsmith taught that consciousness is the only power, but not personal consciousness. Divine consciousness expressing as individual awareness. When you stop trying to use your mind to change conditions, divine mind operates through you automatically. This principle revolutionizes prayer. Instead of asking God to change circumstances, you rest in the recognition that perfect consciousness is already expressing itself as your experience. There's nothing to fix because consciousness doesn't make mistakes. Every seeming problem is actually consciousness appearing in a form you don't recognize or approve of. The same divine intelligence that grows flowers and moves planets is orchestrating your life perfectly, even when it doesn't look perfect to human perception. The practice is simple but challenging. In every situation, instead of trying to make something happen, rest in the truth that consciousness is already handling everything perfectly. Your job isn't to heal, help, or improve, just to get out of the way. The third pillar of this teaching is spiritual discernment, the ability to distinguish between divine ideas and human concepts. Most of what we call problems are simply human interpretations of perfect divine activity that we don't understand. Sickness isn't divine consciousness expressing as illness. It's human consciousness misinterpreting divine activity as disease. Lack isn't God withholding good. It's human perception failing to recognize the abundance that's always present. When you develop spiritual discernment, you stop reacting to appearances and start recognizing the divine reality behind every experience. A financial loss becomes redirection toward greater good. An illness becomes an opportunity to discover your untouchable spiritual nature. This doesn't mean denying human experience or pretending problems don't exist. It means seeing through the human appearance to the divine reality that's actually taking place. Every challenge becomes a doorway to deeper spiritual understanding. The final technique Goldsmith shared was conscious union, the practice of recognizing your oneness with infinite consciousness in every moment. This isn't a meditation technique or visualization. It's a way of living from spiritual identity instead of human personality. Throughout your day, instead of identifying as a person having experiences, you recognize yourself as consciousness itself, expressing as individual awareness. You're not someone who has consciousness. You are consciousness appearing as someone. This shift in identity transforms everything. Problems can't exist because consciousness doesn't have problems. Needs disappear because consciousness lacks nothing. Fear vanishes because consciousness cannot be threatened by anything it creates. The practice is moment-by-moment recognition. I am not Sarah who is tired. I am consciousness expressing as perfect energy. I am not Marcus who needs money. I am consciousness expressing as infinite supply. I am not Linda seeking love. I am love itself. But let's address the elephant in the room. What happens when this teaching doesn't seem to work? When you practice the great nothingness and problems persist? When divine indifference feels like spiritual bypassing? When conscious union seems like self-deception? Goldsmith was honest about this challenge. The human mind is deeply conditioned to believe in separation, problems, and solutions. Years or decades of spiritual materialism don't disappear overnight. The ego will fight this teaching because it threatens its very existence. The key is persistence without attachment to results. You practice these principles not to get anything, but because they reveal what you already are. Some days will feel like profound breakthroughs. Others will feel like complete failure. Both are equally perfect expressions of consciousness. Remember, you're not trying to become spiritual. You're recognizing the spirituality that was never absent. This recognition sometimes feels clear and sometimes feels clouded, but the truth of your being remains unchanged regardless of how you feel about it. Another common obstacle is the fear of losing motivation. If you stop trying to improve your life, won't everything fall apart? If you become indifferent to outcomes, won't you become passive and irresponsible? This fear reveals a fundamental misunderstanding. Divine consciousness is infinitely more intelligent and effective than human effort. When you stop trying to control life, life begins operating at a level of perfection impossible for the human mind to achieve. You don't become passive, you become available for divine action. Instead of forcing solutions based on limited human understanding, you allow infinite intelligence to work through you with perfect timing and wisdom. The ego equates effort with effectiveness, but divine consciousness accomplishes more through one moment of true surrender than years of human struggle. This isn't laziness. It's the ultimate efficiency of allowing life to live itself through you perfectly. Some people worry that this teaching promotes spiritual materialism in reverse. using non-attachment as another technique to get what you want. They practice the great nothingness, hoping to manipulate God into giving them better demonstrations. Goldsmith warned against this trap. True non-attachment doesn't care about demonstrations. You don't practice divine indifference to get healthier, wealthier, or happier. You practice it because it reveals your true nature beyond all conditions. The moment you use these principles as techniques to achieve better human experiences, you've missed the point entirely. This teaching isn't about improving your human life. It's about recognizing that your real life was never human to begin with. The paradox is that when you truly stop caring about demonstrations, they happen naturally. But if you stop caring in order to get demonstrations, you're still trapped in spiritual materialism. The freedom must be genuine, not strategic. The ultimate challenge is learning to live this understanding in a world that operates on completely opposite principles. Your family, friends, and society will pressure you to worry, struggle, and strive. They'll think you've become irresponsible or delusional. Goldsmith faced this challenge constantly. People expected him to be concerned about their problems, to pray for specific outcomes, to participate in the human drama of lack and limitation. Instead, he offered something far more radical: the recognition of perfection right where problems seem to exist. You'll need courage to stand in this truth when everyone around you is convinced that problems are real and effort is necessary. You'll be tempted to doubt yourself when others question your sanity. This is where spiritual maturity becomes essential. Remember, you're not trying to convince anyone or prove anything. You're simply living from the recognition of what you are. Let your peace, your freedom, and your natural demonstrations speak for themselves. Truth doesn't need to be defended, only embodied. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Advanced practitioners learn to apply this teaching to seemingly impossible situations. Terminal illness, bankruptcy, broken relationships, addiction, areas where human hope has been exhausted, and medical or professional help has failed. Jennifer was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. Doctors gave her 3 months to live. Instead of fighting the disease or praying for healing, she practiced the great nothingness. She stopped identifying as a cancer patient and began recognizing herself as perfect spiritual being. The process wasn't easy. Fear would arise, and she'd have to release it into the nothingness. Well-meaning friends would encourage her to fight, and she'd have to maintain her spiritual stance without judging their concern. She lived each day from the recognition that consciousness cannot have cancer. After 8 months, scans showed no trace of cancer. But Jennifer had discovered something more valuable than physical healing: the absolute conviction that her true identity was untouchable by any condition. She'd found freedom beyond all circumstances. David had been addicted to alcohol for 20 years. Multiple rehab attempts had failed. His family had given up, his career was destroyed, and he was living on the streets. Traditional recovery methods focused on fighting addiction, but this approach had only strengthened his sense of being an addict. When he learned Goldsmith's teaching, something clicked. Instead of seeing himself as an addict trying to get sober, he began practicing the recognition that consciousness cannot be addicted to anything. His true self had never touched alcohol because spirit has no material experience. The craving didn't disappear immediately, but his relationship to it transformed. Instead of fighting urges or feeling guilty about them, he recognized them as thoughts arising in consciousness. Not his thoughts, not his urges, just temporary appearances in awareness. Over time, the compulsion simply faded, not through willpower or 12-step programs, but through the recognition that the person who drank never actually existed. Only consciousness exists, appearing as David, forever free from all material dependencies. Patricia's business was failing during the economic crisis. Clients were disappearing, bills were mounting, and bankruptcy seemed inevitable. Traditional business advice focused on marketing harder, cutting costs, and finding new revenue streams, all forms of human effort based on the belief that she needed to save her business. Instead, she applied Goldsmith's teaching to her professional life. She stopped seeing herself as a struggling businesswoman and began recognizing herself as consciousness expressing as perfect supply. She released every thought about saving, improving, or growing her business. This felt irresponsible at first. Shouldn't she be working harder to find solutions? But she persisted in practicing divine indifference to business outcomes while continuing to show up and serve with love, without attachment to results. Within months, new opportunities appeared effortlessly. Clients returned with larger projects. New partnerships formed naturally. Her business not only survived, but thrived, demonstrating that divine intelligence is far more effective than human planning when allowed to operate freely. The most advanced application of this teaching involves relationships and family dynamics. Robert's adult son had been estranged for 5 years following a bitter argument. Traditional advice focused on communication strategies, apologies, and rebuilding trust, all human efforts based on the belief that the relationship was broken. Robert practiced seeing through the appearance of estrangement to the spiritual reality of perfect love that eternally connects him and his son. Instead of trying to fix the relationship, he recognized that consciousness doesn't have relationship problems, because consciousness is one. He stopped seeing his son as someone who needed forgiveness and stopped seeing himself as someone who needed to be forgiven. He released every hope for reconciliation and every fear of permanent separation, resting in the truth that love cannot actually be broken. The reconciliation happened naturally when his son called out of nowhere, unable to explain why his anger had suddenly dissolved. They reunited not as a father and son who had healed their problems, but as expressions of one consciousness recognizing itself. After decades of practicing these principles, something profound emerges. What Goldsmith called the natural state. You stop being someone who practices spiritual principles and become someone who lives from spiritual identity naturally, effortlessly, continuously. Problems still appear in experience, but they don't disturb your peace. Challenges arise, but they don't shake your confidence in the perfection of consciousness. You've learned to rest in the eye of every storm, untouched by the conditions swirling around you. This isn't spiritual bypassing or denial. You respond appropriately to human situations while maintaining awareness of spiritual reality. You can visit the hospital, pay the bills, and work through conflicts while never losing sight of the perfect consciousness that's actually governing everything. The great nothingness becomes your natural dwelling place. Divine indifference becomes your automatic response. Conscious union becomes your permanent identity. You've not achieved something new. You've simply stopped forgetting what you always were. Others begin noticing something different about you, though they may not be able to identify what. Your presence brings peace to chaotic situations. Your calm confidence inspires others without you trying to help. Your natural joy lifts the atmosphere wherever you go. You've become what Goldsmith called a transparency for divine consciousness. Your human personality no longer blocks the expression of infinite love, wisdom, and power. Life lives itself through you with perfect grace, touching everyone you encounter with healing energy. This isn't personal achievement or spiritual superiority. It's simply the natural result of getting out of consciousness's way. When the human sense of self stops interfering with divine expression, miracles become ordinary. Love flows freely. Wisdom speaks spontaneously. Power operates effortlessly. You realize this was always your true nature. The years of seeking, struggling, and striving were just consciousness playing hide-and-seek with itself. Now the game is over. The seeker and the sought are recognized as one. Only consciousness remains, expressing as perfect experience. The ripple effects extend beyond your personal experience. Family members begin experiencing spontaneous healing and breakthroughs without understanding why. Colleagues find themselves more creative and successful. Strangers feel mysteriously uplifted after brief encounters with you. This is the true power of Goldsmith's final teaching. It transforms not just your experience, but everyone in your consciousness. When you recognize your true identity, that recognition lifts the entire field of awareness in which you exist. You're not trying to heal others or save the world. You're simply being what you are, consciousness itself expressing as individual awareness. This authentic being automatically blesses everything it touches because consciousness is inherently blessing. The teaching completes itself. You've moved beyond needing techniques, practices, or principles. You simply live from the direct recognition of divine being, allowing that recognition to express itself naturally as perfect human experience, moment by moment by moment. This is Joel Goldsmith's most dangerous teaching because it ends all seeking, dissolves all problems, and reveals the truth that was never hidden. You are not a human being having spiritual experiences. You are a spiritual being expressing as human awareness. The great nothingness isn't something you do, it's what you are when you stop doing everything else. Divine indifference isn't an attitude you adopt, it's your natural state when human desires and fears dissolve. Conscious union isn't an achievement, it's the recognition of what never began. Most people aren't ready for this level of truth because it demands the complete surrender of everything they believe about themselves, God, and life. It requires the courage to live as consciousness itself, not as someone trying to use consciousness for personal benefit. But for those ready to receive it, this teaching offers the ultimate freedom, liberation from every form of human suffering through the simple recognition of what you have always been. Perfect, eternal, untouchable divine being, expressing as your individual experience right now. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path. There is a teaching so transformative that when you truly grasp it, your entire relationship with God, yourself, and life itself changes forever. Joel Goldsmith spent decades revealing this secret. You are not a sinner seeking redemption. You are already God's child, complete and whole. The moment you stop identifying as broken, everything shifts. Most spiritual seekers spend their entire lives begging for forgiveness, trying to earn God's love, believing they must prove their worthiness. This is the greatest illusion ever sold to humanity. It keeps you small, afraid, and separated from your divine nature. Joel discovered that this belief system is the root of all suffering and disease. When you recognize yourself as God's offspring, not as a fallen creature, you stop asking God for things. You stop bargaining, pleading, and hoping. Instead, you begin recognizing what already is. This is not positive thinking or affirmation. This is spiritual fact. You are the expression of infinite consciousness right now, not someday when you become good enough. The traditional religious model teaches you to confess sins, ask forgiveness, and hope God grants your prayers. Joel Goldsmith turned this completely upside down. He said that prayer is not about changing God's mind about you. Prayer is about changing your mind about yourself. God already knows you as perfect spiritual being. Think about this revolutionary idea. If God is infinite and all, then God cannot create anything unlike itself. A perfect cause cannot produce an imperfect effect. The sun cannot create darkness. Infinite love cannot create a sinner. Your true identity was established before time began, and nothing you've done or will do can alter it. This doesn't mean you ignore mistakes or harmful actions. It means you stop building your identity around them. You stop living from the consciousness of guilt and unworthiness. When you know yourself as God's child, your behavior naturally aligns with love, not because you're trying to earn something, but because you're expressing what you already are. Joel Goldsmith taught that the moment you accept your true identity as God's spiritual offspring, healing begins automatically. Why? Because most disease, lack, and struggle come from the belief in separation. When you believe you're cut off from God, cut off from good, your consciousness creates experiences that match that belief. But here's what happens when you shift. Imagine waking up tomorrow knowing with absolute certainty that you are the beloved child of infinite intelligence. Not hoping for it, not working toward it, but knowing it as present fact. How would you walk through your day? What fears would dissolve? What new possibilities would open? This knowing is not arrogance or ego. It's the humility of recognizing that your good doesn't come from your human efforts. It flows from your spiritual identity. You don't create abundance, health, or love. You recognize them as already present in consciousness. This is the secret Joel spent his life teaching, and it changes everything within weeks when practiced daily. Here's the practical application Joel gave his students. Stop all prayers that begin with asking God for something. Instead, begin every spiritual practice with recognition. Recognize that God is infinite presence right where you are. Recognize that this presence is your true identity. Recognize that nothing can be added to what is already complete. This feels strange at first because we're trained to see ourselves as beggars at the throne of God. But Joel discovered through decades of healing work that the most powerful prayer is simply resting in the awareness of what already is. Not trying to get God's attention, but recognizing God as the only presence and power. When you live from this consciousness, even for a few minutes each day, your entire experience begins to transform. Problems that seemed impossible start resolving. Relationships heal. Resources appear. Not because you manipulated God, but because you stopped blocking the natural flow of good with the belief in your own unworthiness and separation. Let me share a transformation story that reveals the power of this teaching. A woman came to Joel Goldsmith consumed with guilt over her past. She had made choices that hurt her family, and for 15 years she carried this burden. Every prayer was an apology, every meditation a confession. She believed God was punishing her with illness and financial struggle. Joel asked her one simple question: can God's child ever stop being God's child? She was silent. He continued, if you are the offspring of infinite love, when did that stop being true? Show me the moment you ceased being spiritual. She couldn't. The guilt was real, the pain was real, but her identity as God's child had never changed. Within 3 months of releasing the sinner identity and recognizing herself as God's beloved child, her chronic pain diminished significantly. Within 6 months, an unexpected opportunity restored her financial stability. But the greatest healing was internal. She stopped living in the past and began experiencing the presence of God in the present moment. This wasn't magic or wishful thinking. When consciousness shifts from unworthiness to spiritual identity, the entire energy field transforms. What was blocked begins to flow. This is the practical mysticism Joel taught, and thousands experienced similar transformations over decades. Another powerful example involves a man who spent 20 years in traditional religion, always feeling he fell short of God's standards. He prayed constantly for forgiveness, tried to be good enough, but always felt distant from God. His health reflected this consciousness: anxiety, insomnia, high blood pressure, constant stress. When he discovered Joel's teachings, everything shifted. Instead of morning prayers asking God to forgive him and help him be better, he began with recognition. I am God's spiritual offspring right now. Nothing I did yesterday changed this truth. Nothing I will do today can alter it. I rest in this completed identity. The first week felt mechanical, like he was lying to himself. But Joel taught that you're not creating truth, you're recognizing it. By the 3rd week, something broke open in his consciousness. He felt a peace he'd never known. The constant mental chatter of self-judgment quieted. He started sleeping through the night. Within 4 months, his blood pressure normalized without medication changes. His relationships improved because he stopped projecting his own self-judgment onto others. He found himself naturally making healthier choices, not from guilt or fear, but from the consciousness of wholeness. This is what happens when you stop being a sinner and become who you already are. Joel Goldsmith discovered something profound in his healing practice. People who carried the heaviest religious guilt often had the most physical ailments. The connection wasn't coincidental. When you believe you're fundamentally flawed, separated from God, and deserving punishment, your body responds to that consciousness. Disease is often the physical manifestation of spiritual misidentification. But here's the transformation. A woman with severe arthritis had spent decades believing her pain was punishment for past mistakes. When she began recognizing herself as God's spiritual child, complete and whole, something remarkable happened. She stopped mentally rehearsing her failures. She stopped reliving moments of shame and regret. As her thought patterns changed, her inflammation gradually reduced over several months. Her doctors were surprised but had no explanation. Joel knew. Consciousness creates experience. When you live from the awareness of spiritual wholeness rather than human brokenness, the body begins reflecting that higher truth. This isn't denying the physical, it's recognizing the spiritual as primary. The healing wasn't instant, and it required daily practice. But within 8 months, she experienced 70% improvement. More importantly, she was free from the mental prison of guilt that had tormented her for 30 years. She had stopped being a sinner in her own mind and accepted her true identity. Here's what Joel emphasized repeatedly. This teaching isn't about becoming God's child someday through enough good behavior or spiritual practice. You cannot become what you already are. The entire journey is about recognition, not achievement. Every moment you spend trying to earn God's love, you're denying the love that's already present. This is why traditional approaches often fail to bring lasting peace. They keep you focused on your inadequacy rather than your divine nature. They make God into a distant authority figure you must please rather than the infinite consciousness that is your true identity. Joel's mystical Christianity reveals what Jesus actually taught. The kingdom of God is within you now. When you grasp this truth, not intellectually but in the depths of your being, transformation is inevitable. You stop living from lack and limitation. You stop seeing yourself through the lens of past mistakes. You begin experiencing the presence of God not as something you seek, but as what you are. This is the secret that changes everything. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others discover their true identity as God's child. Subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom that breaks religious conditioning, and comment. Which story of recognition and healing touched your heart most deeply today? Beyond the foundational recognition of your spiritual identity, Joel taught specific practices to deepen this consciousness. The first is what he called the practice of the presence. This isn't complicated meditation or ritual. It's simply pausing throughout your day to recognize that God is the only presence where you are, and you are the expression of that presence. Start with this. Before responding to any situation today, take 3 seconds to silently acknowledge, God is present here as me. Not God is with me, helping me, or supporting me, but God is being me. This subtle shift in language reflects the truth that you're not separate from divine consciousness seeking connection. You are the activity of God in expression. When a challenge appears, instead of immediately trying to fix it from human effort, pause and recognize spiritual identity first. I am God's offspring. This situation cannot change that truth. What would divine consciousness reveal here? This isn't passive waiting, it's active recognition that shifts your entire approach from struggle to flow. Joel's students who practiced this consistently reported that solutions appeared more naturally, relationships improved without forced effort, and a sense of rightness pervaded their days. One businessman said he stopped approaching deals from anxiety about winning and instead from recognition of spiritual completeness, and his success rate doubled within a year. The second practice Joel emphasized is releasing personal sense. This means recognizing that the you who feels inadequate, guilty, or separate doesn't actually exist. It's a false identity constructed from years of conditioning, judgment, and misunderstanding. When you stop defending and maintaining this false self, your true spiritual identity emerges naturally. Here's how this works practically. When self-criticism arises, instead of fighting it or believing it, simply observe it and say internally, "This is not my voice. This is old programming. My true identity is established by God, not by my past or my thoughts." This is an affirmation to convince yourself. It's recognition of what's actually true beneath the mental noise. A teacher who practiced this for 3 months noticed her constant anxiety about performance disappeared. She stopped taking students' behavior personally. She found herself responding from wisdom rather than reacting from fear. Her energy levels increased because she wasn't burning fuel maintaining a false identity that required constant defense and validation. The practice feels uncomfortable initially because ego fights for survival. But Joel taught that ego is just mistaken identity, not an enemy to battle. As you consistently recognize your spiritual nature, the false sense naturally dissolves like darkness when light appears. You don't fight darkness, you turn on the light of truth. The third transformative practice is living from the consciousness of already being what you seek. Most people pray for health while identifying as sick, pray for abundance while identifying as lacking, pray for love while believing they're unworthy. This divided consciousness blocks demonstration. Joel taught that you must live from the end, from spiritual completeness. This means if you're seeking healing, you stop identifying as a sick person, hoping to become well. Instead, you recognize yourself as spiritual being, already whole in God's consciousness. The body may still show symptoms temporarily, but your identity shifts from sick person to complete spiritual expression. This shift in consciousness is what allows healing to manifest physically over time. A man with chronic fatigue practiced this. Instead of constantly monitoring his energy levels and identifying as tired, he began each day recognizing himself as spiritual being, tireless and complete. He stopped talking about his exhaustion, stopped researching his symptoms obsessively, and started living from wholeness. Within 2 months, his energy gradually returned. This isn't denial of physical experience. It's recognition that spiritual identity is more fundamental than physical appearance. As consciousness changes, experience follows. Joel proved this truth through decades of healing work. The key is patience and consistency, knowing that demonstration follows realization, sometimes immediately, sometimes gradually, over weeks or months. The fourth practice Joel gave is meditation without words. Most spiritual practice involves mental activity, repeating mantras, visualizing outcomes, or thinking spiritual thoughts. Joel taught that the highest consciousness is silent awareness, resting in the presence of God without trying to direct it or use it for personal purposes. This is pure recognition without agenda. Here's the practice. Sit quietly and release all attempts to make something happen. Don't try to feel peaceful. Don't try to contact God. Don't try to solve problems. Simply rest in awareness itself, recognizing that God is present as the very consciousness with which you're aware. This isn't passive. It's the most active state possible because you're letting infinite intelligence operate without human interference. A woman practiced this for just 10 minutes daily. She stopped her usual prayers, asking God for help with her struggling business. She simply sat in silent recognition of divine presence. Within 3 weeks, ideas began flowing naturally. Within 2 months, her business turned around completely. Not from her strategic planning, but from inspiration that arose from consciousness. Joel discovered that this wordless awareness is where true transformation happens. When you stop trying to use God and simply rest in being God's expression, divine intelligence operates through you naturally. Solutions appear, resources manifest, relationships heal, and your entire life reorganizes around spiritual truth rather than human struggle and effort. Now let's address the challenges you'll face when adopting this consciousness. The first and most persistent obstacle is guilt about past actions. You'll recognize yourself as God's child, feel peace for a moment, then memory brings up something you did years ago and the old identity returns. How can I be God's perfect child when I did that terrible thing? Joel anticipated this challenge. He taught that mistakes are part of the human experience, but they don't define your spiritual identity. A child learning to walk falls repeatedly, but falling doesn't make them less the parent's child. Your spiritual identity was established by God, not by your behavior. Nothing you've done can change what God created you to be. The practical solution is this. When guilt arises, don't fight it or suppress it. Acknowledge the feeling, then gently return to recognition. Yes, I made that choice. Yes, it caused harm. And yes, I remain God's spiritual offspring. These two truths coexist. The guilt will arise less frequently as you consistently choose recognition over identification with past actions. One student struggled with this for months. Every time he felt close to God, memories of his addiction years would flood back. Joel told him, "The memory is just memory. It has no power to change your spiritual identity. Let it arise, observe it without judgment, and return to truth." Within 6 months of this practice, the memories lost their emotional charge completely. The second major challenge is the physical evidence that seems to contradict spiritual identity. Your bank account shows lack, your body shows disease, your relationships show conflict. How can you recognize yourself as God's complete child when physical evidence screams otherwise? This is where most people abandon the teaching and return to traditional begging prayers. Joel's answer was profound. Physical appearance is the effect, not the cause. Consciousness is cause. When you change consciousness first and maintain that change consistently despite appearances, the physical gradually conforms. But if you let appearance dictate consciousness, nothing changes. This requires what Joel called spiritual maturity, the willingness to stand in truth despite contrary evidence. A couple facing bankruptcy practiced this principle. Instead of constant panic about bills, they spent 30 minutes each morning recognizing their spiritual identity as expressions of infinite supply. They took practical action during the day, but from consciousness of completeness rather than desperation. It felt like lying to themselves initially, but after 6 weeks, unexpected opportunities emerged. After 3 months, their financial situation had completely turned around. They later realized the shift happened internally first. They stopped emanating desperation, which changed how people responded to them. They made clearer decisions from peace rather than panic. Consciousness creates experience, but you must maintain new consciousness long enough for it to demonstrate physically. The third challenge is the resistance from religious programming. If you were raised believing you're a sinner who needs constant forgiveness, recognizing yourself as God's already perfect child feels like arrogance or heresy. Old voices echo in your mind. Who do you think you are? You're just a human. This is pride. You need to humble yourself before God. Joel addressed this directly. True humility is recognizing that your goodness comes from God, not from you. False humility is denying that you express God's nature. When you say, I am God's spiritual child, complete and whole, you're not claiming personal achievement. You're acknowledging what God created, which actually glorifies God more than calling yourself a miserable sinner. A woman from strict religious background wrestled with this intensely. Every time she recognized her spiritual identity, she felt she was dishonoring God. Joel explained, does a parent want their child to constantly call themselves worthless? Or does the parent delight when the child recognizes the love and gifts they've been given? This reframe changed everything for her. She began seeing that her old religious training actually kept her focused on herself and her inadequacy rather than on God's nature. True God focus meant recognizing God's perfect expression, which is what she actually was. Within months, she experienced more genuine connection with divine presence than decades of traditional practice had produced. The shift was recognizing God's work, not claiming personal superiority. The fourth challenge is maintaining this consciousness in crisis moments. When emergency hits, when diagnosis comes, when relationship shatters, the instinct is to abandon spiritual recognition and dive into human panic. This is natural, and Joel never condemned it. But he taught that crisis is precisely when recognizing spiritual identity matters most, even if just for moments at a time. Here's the practice. In crisis, you don't need to maintain perfect consciousness for hours. You simply return to recognition repeatedly, even for 30 seconds at a time. Despite this appearance, my spiritual identity remains unchanged. God is present here. I am God's expression now. Then you handle the practical situation. Then you return to recognition again. A father whose child was hospitalized practiced this. He couldn't maintain spiritual consciousness constantly while dealing with doctors and insurance and fear. But dozens of times throughout each day, he would pause for just a few breaths and recognize truth beneath the appearance. This didn't make him passive. It gave him clarity to make better decisions and strength to support his family. After 2 difficult weeks, his child recovered. But the greater transformation was in him. He had proven to himself that spiritual identity could be maintained even in worse circumstances, not perfectly, but sufficiently. This gave him unshakable foundation for future challenges. Joel taught that consciousness developed in crisis becomes permanent strength afterward. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart and help you maintain spiritual identity despite obstacles, like to support this transformative content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices from Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform right now through recognition of your true nature? Let's explore advanced integration of this consciousness in daily life. Joel taught that recognizing yourself as God's child isn't just for meditation time. It transforms how you work, relate, create, and serve. When you go to work tomorrow from the consciousness of spiritual completeness, everything about your approach changes. You're no longer trying to prove your worth or earn approval. A corporate executive applied this teaching to high-pressure presentations. Previously, she prepared from anxiety about judgment and fear of failure. After embracing her identity as God's spiritual expression, she prepared from consciousness of already being complete. The preparation became joyful rather than stressful. She stopped second-guessing every word. The transformation in her presentations was remarkable. Colleagues noticed increased confidence without arrogance, clarity without rigidity. She fielded challenging questions from peace rather than defensiveness. Within a year, she received promotion, but more importantly, she stopped living for external validation. Her sense of worth came from spiritual identity, making success a natural byproduct rather than desperate goal. This is practical mysticism, bringing eternal truth into temporal activity. You don't separate spiritual identity from daily work. Every task becomes opportunity to express the divine consciousness you are. Every interaction becomes chance to recognize God's presence in yourself and others. This isn't adding spiritual practice to busy life. It's recognizing spiritual reality as the foundation of all life. Joel taught that relationships transform completely when you recognize spiritual identity in yourself and others. Most relationships operate from mutual need. I need you to make me feel worthy. You need me to make you feel loved. This creates dependency and eventual disappointment because no human can complete another human. But when you know yourself as God's complete child, relationships become sharing rather than seeking. A marriage on the verge of divorce illustrates this. Both partners were demanding the other change, fix them, complete them. When the wife discovered Joel's teachings, she stopped seeing her husband as failing to meet her needs and began recognizing him as God's spiritual child, even while he still acted from human patterns. She stopped trying to change him. This wasn't passive acceptance of harmful behavior. She maintained healthy boundaries. But her consciousness toward him shifted from judgment to recognition. She no longer needed him to be different for her to be okay, because her completeness came from spiritual identity. This energetic shift changed everything between them over several months. As she stopped emanating demands and disappointment, he naturally began responding differently. He felt space to change without being forced. Within a year, they had completely rebuilt their marriage, not through couples therapy or communication techniques, but through one person consistently recognizing spiritual truth beneath human appearances. Joel called this beholding the Christ in everyone, which dissolves discord naturally. Financial consciousness transforms radically when you stop being a sinner and become God's child. Most people approach money from consciousness of lack, unworthiness, and separation from supply. They work frantically to create abundance through human effort alone, or they pray desperately for God to send them money, reinforcing the very sense of separation that blocks demonstration. Joel taught that abundance is spiritual reality before its physical manifestation. When you recognize yourself as the expression of infinite consciousness, you recognize that infinite supply is your spiritual nature. You don't seek abundance. You recognize it as already present in consciousness. Then you take inspired action from that recognition rather than desperate action from fear of lack. A single mother struggling financially practiced this daily. Before looking at bills or bank statements, she spent time recognizing her spiritual identity as expression of infinite supply. She didn't deny the physical lack, but she refused to build her consciousness on it. She looked from truth toward appearance rather than from appearance toward truth. The shift took 3 months of consistent practice. First, anxiety about money decreased, giving her clearer thinking. Then small, unexpected income appeared. Then a much better job opportunity. Within 6 months, she was financially stable. But the permanent transformation was consciousness. She now understood that supply flows from spiritual recognition, not from human struggle. This understanding served her for decades afterward, through various circumstances. Health consciousness is perhaps where this teaching demonstrates most powerfully. Joel healed countless people not through treating disease but through revealing spiritual identity. When you stop identifying as sick body trying to become healthy and instead recognize yourself as spiritual being, temporarily experiencing physical discord, everything shifts. The body is effect, not cause. A man with serious heart condition was told surgery was inevitable. Before scheduling it, he spent 6 weeks in intensive practice of recognizing his spiritual identity. Not visualizing healthy heart, not affirming healing, not begging God for miracle. Simply resting in recognition that his true identity was spiritual, whole, and complete in God's consciousness, regardless of body's current appearance. He also followed medical advice and made practical lifestyle changes, but from consciousness of completeness rather than fear of death. When he returned for pre-surgery evaluation, his condition had improved so significantly that doctors postponed surgery to monitor. After 3 more months of practice combined with medical care, surgery was deemed unnecessary. The doctors called it spontaneous improvement. Joel would say consciousness changed and body followed. This doesn't mean abandoning medical care or that everyone heals physically. It means your primary identity is spiritual, and maintaining that recognition creates the consciousness in which healing can manifest. Sometimes quickly, sometimes gradually, sometimes in ways unexpected, but always in response to consciousness. As we approach the culmination of this teaching, understand that what Joel Goldsmith revealed isn't another technique to get things from God. It's recognition of what eternally is. You haven't been working toward becoming God's child through these practices. You've been removing the false beliefs that obscured what you always were. This is uncovering, not creating. Recognizing, not achieving. Every moment you've spent in this consciousness, you haven't been improving yourself. You've been seeing yourself correctly for the first time. The peace you feel isn't peace you generated. It's the natural state of your being when false identity drops away. The transformations aren't rewards for good practice. They're the natural demonstration of consciousness aligned with truth. This realization liberates you from the endless seeking that characterizes most spiritual paths. You're not on a journey to reach God. You're awakening to the truth that you never left. God didn't create you as sinner who must earn way back to grace. God created you as spiritual offspring, and that has never changed despite anything you've thought, done, or experienced. The implications are staggering. If your true identity is established by God and unchangeable by human experience, then guilt about the past loses its power. Fear of the future loses its grip. Need for external validation disappears. You rest in consciousness of being, and from that consciousness, you live, move, create, love, heal, and serve. This is freedom beyond anything religion typically offers. Joel spent his final years emphasizing that this consciousness must be lived, not just understood intellectually. Knowledge of spiritual identity means nothing if you return to sinner consciousness the moment you close the spiritual book. The transformation comes from consistent, moment-by-moment return to recognition, especially when everything in you wants to return to old patterns of guilt, fear, and separation. Here's what daily life looks like from this consciousness. You wake recognizing yourself as God's expression before identifying with the person in the mirror. You approach your day's activities as opportunities to let divine intelligence operate through you, rather than problems you must solve through limited human thinking. You meet people recognizing spiritual identity in them beneath their human behavior. When challenge arises, your first response becomes recognition rather than panic. When success comes, you receive it as natural demonstration of consciousness rather than personal achievement to defend. When failure appears, you don't build identity around it. You acknowledge the experience while maintaining recognition of unchanging spiritual truth. This becomes natural with practice, not forced or rigid. A practitioner of 20 years said the greatest shift was that spiritual recognition moved from something she did to something she lived from. It became her default consciousness rather than special practice. She no longer needed to work at remembering who she was. She simply knew, and from that knowing, everything else followed naturally and beautifully, even in difficult circumstances. The final integration is recognizing this truth isn't just personal. When you know yourself as God's spiritual child, you begin recognizing the same truth in everyone you encounter. The difficult colleague isn't just irritating personality. They're God's spiritual offspring, temporarily lost in false identity. The homeless person isn't just unfortunate circumstance. They're divine expression having temporary human experience. This doesn't mean you condone harmful behavior or enable dysfunction. But your consciousness toward others changes from judgment to recognition. You see beyond appearance to spiritual reality. This silent recognition has power to awaken others because consciousness is contagious. When you stand firmly in recognition of truth, others feel it even without words. Joel called this the highest form of prayer, beholding spiritual identity in everyone. A teacher practiced this with troubled students. Instead of seeing them as problems to fix, she silently recognized their spiritual nature while setting appropriate boundaries. Over the school year, dramatic transformations occurred in students everyone else had given up on, not through lectures, but through consciousness. This is how you change the world, not by trying to fix everyone, not by forcing spiritual truth on others, but by living so completely from recognition of divine presence in yourself that your consciousness illuminates truth for those ready to see it. You become living testimony that human identity is illusion and spiritual identity is eternal fact. So what happens when you stop being a sinner and become God's child? Everything changes because your consciousness changes. Not someday in distant future, not after years of spiritual practice, but in this moment when recognition dawns. You realize you've been complete all along, seeking what you already possessed, trying to earn what was freely given before time began. The transformation isn't from bad person to good person. It's from false identity to true identity, from living as if separated from God to recognizing yourself as expression of God, from begging for what you think you lack to recognizing the infinite present where you are. This is Joel Goldsmith's eternal message, as relevant today as when he first taught it decades ago. Your work now is simply this: return to recognition. When you forget and fall into old patterns of guilt, fear, or separation, don't condemn yourself. That's just more sinner consciousness. Instead, gently recognize truth again. I am God's spiritual child. This is established fact. Nothing changes this. Return to this recognition 1,000 times daily if necessary, until it becomes your natural consciousness. From this consciousness, you live freely, you create joyfully, you love completely, you serve naturally, you heal authentically. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because you're expressing what you are. This is the secret that changes everything. You already are what you've been seeking to become. Welcome home to your true identity as God's beloved, complete, eternal spiritual offspring. If your spiritual understanding has expanded and your consciousness transformed through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video to help others discover their true identity beyond sin and separation. Subscribe for more transformative teachings that reveal spiritual reality, and comment, I am God's child, to confirm and activate your recognition of eternal truth right now. Most people spend their entire lives begging an external God for help, never understanding why their prayers feel empty. Joel Goldsmith discovered something that changed everything. You are not separate from God. You are the very presence of divine consciousness itself. When you pray to God, you create distance. When you pray as God, you become the answer. This is not blasphemy. This is the deepest truth of mystical Christianity. God is not a person sitting on a throne somewhere in the sky. God is infinite consciousness, and you are the expression of that consciousness right here, right now. Every cell of your body is filled with this divine presence, waiting for you to recognize it. The moment you stop asking and start being, everything shifts. You are not pleading with a distant deity. You are awakening to the power that already lives within you. This is the secret that transformed thousands of lives through Joel's teachings. This is what happens when you finally understand. You are not praying to God. You are praying as God. Think about how you have prayed until now. You asked for healing, for money, for love, for solutions. You begged, you bargained, you pleaded. And sometimes nothing happened. You felt abandoned, ignored, or unworthy. But the problem was never God's unwillingness to help. The problem was the entire premise of your prayer. When you pray to God, you are operating from a sense of separation. You are saying that God is over there and you are over here, lacking something. You are reinforcing the very illusion that causes your suffering. You are denying the fundamental truth of your spiritual identity. Joel Goldsmith taught that true prayer is not petition. True prayer is recognition. It is the conscious awareness that God is already present as your very being. You do not need to convince God to help you. You need to awaken to the fact that God's infinite power is already functioning as you. This understanding changes everything. Your prayers stop being desperate requests. They become powerful declarations of truth. You are not asking for healing. You are recognizing that wholeness is already present. You are not begging for abundance. You are acknowledging that infinite supply is your spiritual nature. Let me show you the practical difference. The old way of praying sounds like this. Dear God, please heal my body. Please send me money. Please fix my relationship. This prayer assumes you are broken, empty, and separate from divine help. It reinforces lack and limitation in your consciousness. Now listen to prayer as God. I recognize the divine presence that I am. Infinite wholeness is expressing as this body right now. Limitless abundance is the nature of my consciousness. Perfect love is already present in this situation. Do you feel the difference? One is begging. The other is recognizing truth. When you pray as God, you are not denying your human experience. You are elevating your awareness to the spiritual reality that exists beyond appearances. You are not pretending problems do not exist. You are acknowledging the greater truth that dissolves those problems. This is not positive thinking or affirmation. This is spiritual realization. You are not trying to create something new. You are uncovering what has always been present. The divine presence does not come and go based on your prayers. It is the eternal reality of your being, waiting for your recognition. Joel Goldsmith called this the practice of recognizing God as individual being, not God and you, just God appearing as you. There is only one power, one presence, one consciousness, and it is expressing itself as your individual existence right now. This is not ego inflation. This is spiritual awakening. When you truly understand this, prayer becomes communion rather than petition. You are not talking to someone. You are aligning with the infinite consciousness that you are. You are not asking for something outside yourself. You are awakening to the fullness that is already present within your own being. The transformation begins the moment you stop seeing yourself as a separate person trying to reach God. You are not separate. You never were. The sense of separation is the only problem. The recognition of oneness is the only solution. This is what happens when you stop praying to God and start praying as God. This is the foundation of everything Joel taught. This is the secret that leads to effortless healing, natural abundance, and the peace that surpasses understanding. And in the next minutes, you will discover exactly how to apply this revolutionary understanding to every area of your life. Sarah had been praying for her chronic pain to disappear for 7 years. Every night she begged God to heal her body. She tried every prayer formula, every religious technique, every spiritual method she could find. Nothing worked. The pain remained, and her faith began to crumble under the weight of unanswered prayers. Then she discovered Joel Goldsmith's teachings on praying as God. At first it seemed impossible, even arrogant. How could she, a suffering human being, pray as if she were God? But something in the teaching resonated deeply. She decided to try for 1 month, completely changing her approach to prayer. Instead of begging for healing, she began each morning with recognition. The divine presence that I am is perfect wholeness. Infinite life is expressing as this body right now. There is no power in pain because there is only one power, and it is God. She did not try to make the pain go away. She simply recognized the greater truth. The first 2 weeks brought no physical change, but something shifted in her consciousness. She felt less victimized by the pain, less identified with it. By week 3, she noticed the pain intensity decreasing. By week 6, she experienced her first completely pain-free day in 7 years. Today, she lives free from chronic pain, not because God finally answered her prayers, but because she awakened to the truth that was present all along. Marcus was drowning in debt, $40,000 of credit card bills, a failing business, and no clear path forward. For months he prayed desperately. God, please send me money. Please save my business. Please help me survive. His prayers felt like throwing words into an empty void. Nothing changed except his growing desperation. When he learned about praying as God, he felt resistant. How could he claim divine abundance when his bank account was empty? But Joel's teachings made sense. If God is infinite supply and God is expressing as individual being, then infinite supply must be his spiritual nature, regardless of current appearances. He began practicing recognition. I am the presence of infinite abundance. Limitless supply is the nature of my consciousness. Every need is already met in the divine reality that I am. He did this daily, not to create abundance, but to align his awareness with spiritual truth. He stopped the desperate energy of begging and moved into the power of recognition. Within 3 months, unexpected opportunities appeared. A former colleague offered a consulting contract. A business idea he had abandoned suddenly found investors. His debt did not disappear overnight, but the flow of income increased steadily. Within 18 months, he was completely debt-free and his business had transformed. The shift began not with God giving him something, but with him recognizing what was already spiritually present. Jennifer's marriage was collapsing. Years of resentment, communication breakdowns, and emotional distance had created a wall between her and her husband. She prayed constantly, "God, please fix my husband. Please change his heart. Please save my marriage." Her prayers felt powerless because they were focused on changing someone else. Joel's teaching showed her a different way. She could not change her husband through prayer, but she could recognize the divine presence in him and in the relationship itself. She stopped praying for her marriage and started recognizing the truth about her marriage. Perfect love was already present, obscured only by false perceptions and ego reactions. Her new practice became, "I recognize divine love as the only presence in this relationship. The consciousness that I am and the consciousness that my husband is are one in God. There is no separation, no real conflict, only temporary blindness to the truth." She focused on seeing her husband through spiritual eyes rather than hurt feelings. The transformation took time. Weeks passed before she noticed subtle shifts. Her husband seemed softer, more open. Conversations became easier. Old patterns began dissolving. It took nearly a year, but their marriage not only survived, it became deeper and more authentic than ever before. The healing came not from God intervening, but from Jennifer awakening to the love that was always present. These stories are not miracles in the traditional sense. They are demonstrations of what happens when consciousness shifts from separation to recognition. Sarah, Marcus, and Jennifer did not receive something from an external God. They awakened to the divine reality that was already functioning as their true identity. This is the power of praying as God. The results are not always instant. Sometimes recognition deepens gradually over weeks or months. Sometimes old patterns resist before they dissolve. But every person who practices this way discovers the same truth. You are not separate from the power you have been seeking. You are the very presence of that power, here and now. This is not about ego or personal power. This is about spiritual identity. When you recognize yourself as the expression of divine consciousness, you stop living from fear, lack, and limitation. You start living from wholeness, abundance, and peace. You stop begging an external source. You start being the presence you were created to express. If these transformation stories inspire you to discover your true spiritual identity, like this video to help others find these life-changing teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom that awakens your divine nature, and comment which story resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey right now. Beyond the foundational practice of recognizing God as your being, Joel Goldsmith taught complementary techniques that deepen this realization. The first is what he called the practice of silence. Not the silence of suppressing thoughts, but the silence of resting in the awareness of divine presence without words, without effort, without striving. Most people fill their prayer time with endless words, petitions, and mental activity. They believe more words equal more power. But Joel discovered the opposite. True spiritual power emerges in the silence where human effort ceases and divine consciousness reveals itself. This is not empty silence. This is pregnant silence, filled with the presence of God. Practice this daily. After your recognition statements, sit in complete silence for 5 to 10 minutes. Do not try to make anything happen. Do not visualize outcomes. Do not repeat affirmations. Simply rest in the awareness that divine presence is here, now, as you. Let that presence do its perfect work without interference from your human mind. In that silence, something happens that words cannot accomplish. Your consciousness shifts from human effort to divine grace. You stop trying to make things happen and allow the infinite intelligence that created the universe to work through you. This is where real transformation occurs, in the silent recognition of what is already spiritually true. The second complementary technique is releasing material sense. Material sense is the belief that your good comes from external sources, from people, from circumstances, from physical conditions. As long as you believe your healing depends on doctors, your abundance depends on jobs, or your happiness depends on other people, you are praying to God rather than as God. Joel taught that spiritual consciousness recognizes only one source, the divine presence itself. Your good does not come from outside. It comes from the infinite consciousness expressing as your individual being. Doctors may be instruments, jobs may be channels, people may be vehicles, but they are never the source. God is the only source. Practice releasing material sense by catching yourself every time you think your solution must come from a specific person or circumstance. Recognize instead, my source is infinite consciousness. My good comes from God expressing as my being. I am not limited to human channels. This shifts your dependence from the external to the internal, from the temporary to the eternal. This does not mean you reject human help or practical action. It means you recognize that behind every human channel is the one divine source. You receive help gratefully, but you do not make any person or circumstance your God. Your security rests in spiritual reality, not material appearances. The third technique is what Joel called impersonalization. This means recognizing that problems have no personal identity or power. Illness is not your illness. Lack is not your poverty. Conflict is not your enemy. These are simply appearances, temporary beliefs, false suggestions that have no reality in God. When you personalize problems, you give them power over you. You identify with them, you own them, you make them part of your story. But when you impersonalize, you see them as the nothingness they truly are. Beliefs floating in consciousness with no power except what you give them through acceptance and fear. Practice this. When facing any challenge, say silently, "This has no power because it has no presence in God. It is not mine, not personal, not real. It is simply a suggestion I am now refusing to accept. Only divine perfection is present. Only divine power is operating. Only divine harmony is real." You are not denying your experience. You are denying the power behind the experience. Impersonalization removes the sting from problems. They become temporary clouds passing through your awareness rather than solid realities defining your existence. When you stop personalizing challenges, they lose their grip on your consciousness. And when they lose their grip on consciousness, they begin losing their grip on your experience. These three techniques work together with the foundation of praying as God. Recognition establishes your true identity. Silence allows divine wisdom to emerge. Releasing material sense shifts your dependence to spiritual source. Impersonalization removes power from appearances. Together they create a complete practice of spiritual consciousness. You do not need to perfect all these techniques immediately. Start with recognition, the foundation, then add silence, then practice releasing material sense, then work with impersonalization. Let your practice develop naturally over weeks and months. Spiritual consciousness is not built in a day. It is cultivated through consistent, patient practice. Joel Goldsmith spent years developing these understandings through direct spiritual experience. He tested them in thousands of healing situations. He refined them through decades of teaching. You are receiving the distilled wisdom of a lifetime of spiritual discovery. Trust the process, practice faithfully, and watch as your consciousness transforms. Remember, you are not trying to get something through these practices. You are recognizing what already is. You are not creating spiritual reality. You are uncovering it. You are not becoming divine. You are awakening to the divinity that has always been your true nature. This is the power of praying as God rather than to God. But let's be honest about the challenges you will face. The first and biggest obstacle is doubt. Your rational mind will resist this entire approach. It will say, "This is arrogant. This is delusional. This is dangerous. You are not God." And in one sense, your mind is correct. Your human ego is not God. But your essential consciousness is the expression of divine presence. The doubt will come in waves, especially when circumstances do not change immediately. You will recognize truth in the morning and doubt it by afternoon. You will practice for a week and feel powerful, then face a setback and question everything. This is normal. This is part of the process. Joel himself experienced these doubts during his years of spiritual discovery. The way through doubt is not to fight it, but to recognize it for what it is, another appearance in consciousness with no real power. When doubt arises, do not engage it in argument. Simply return to recognition. God is present as my being right now. This doubt has no power to change spiritual truth. I rest in what is real. Acknowledge the doubt, then move past it. Over time, as you see results from your practice, doubt loses its grip. You build a track record of spiritual demonstration. You accumulate evidence that consciousness truly does govern experience. The doubt never completely disappears, but it becomes background noise rather than a paralyzing force. You learn to practice despite doubt, not after doubt vanishes. The second major challenge is impatience. You want immediate results. You practice recognition for a few days and expect your entire life to transform. When change does not happen on your timeline, you become frustrated and abandon the practice. But spiritual consciousness develops like physical strength, gradually, through consistent practice over time. Joel was clear about this. Spiritual realization is not magic. It is the natural result of aligning consciousness with truth. Sometimes demonstrations happen quickly. Sometimes they unfold over months. Sometimes the change happens first in your inner peace, then later in outer circumstances. You cannot control the timeline. You can only control your faithfulness to the practice. The antidote to impatience is surrendering outcomes while remaining committed to practice. You practice recognition not to get results, but because it is the truth. You sit in silence not to make things happen, but because you are communing with your own divine nature. When you release attachment to specific timing, the pressure dissolves and practice becomes joyful rather than burdensome. Many people experience what Joel called the demonstration lag. Consciousness shifts first, then circumstances follow. You may feel different inside before anything changes outside. Trust this. Inner transformation always precedes outer change. If you are experiencing peace, clarity, or new understanding, the physical demonstration is already in motion. Do not let impatience abort the process. The third challenge is inconsistency. You practice intensely for a week, then stop for 2 weeks. You recognize truth when things are good, but abandon it when crises hit. You read Joel's books with passion, then let them collect dust. Inconsistency prevents the deep transformation that comes from sustained spiritual practice. Spiritual consciousness is built through daily recognition, just as physical health requires daily care. You would not exercise once a week and expect fitness. You would not eat healthy one day and expect wellness. Similarly, you cannot practice spiritual recognition sporadically and expect transformed consciousness. Daily practice, even brief, is more powerful than occasional intense sessions. Create a simple, sustainable daily practice. 5 minutes of recognition in the morning, 5 minutes of silence before sleep. On difficult days, do at least this minimum. On open days, extend the practice. The key is consistency, not perfection. 100 days of 5-minute practice will transform your consciousness more than 10 days of hour-long practice, followed by weeks of nothing. Joel emphasized that spiritual living is not about dramatic experiences or mystical states. It is about the steady, quiet cultivation of divine awareness in the midst of daily life. The power is in the consistency. The transformation comes through repetition. The demonstration emerges from faithfulness. Make the practice non-negotiable, as essential as breathing. The fourth challenge is isolation. You may be the only person in your life practicing these principles. Family members think you are strange. Friends do not understand. You feel alone on this path. This sense of isolation can weaken your commitment when you most need support and encouragement. Joel faced this too. His teachings were radical for his time. Many people rejected his message. He learned to find strength in his inner communion with God rather than depending on external validation. He built communities of like-minded seekers who supported each other's practice. He created resources that helped people feel connected to something larger than themselves. You can do the same. Seek out Joel Goldsmith study groups, online communities, or local gatherings where these principles are honored. Read his books regularly to strengthen your understanding. Listen to his recordings to feel connected to his consciousness. Build relationships with others walking this path. You do not need many people. just a few who truly understand. Most importantly, recognize that your real companion on this journey is the divine presence itself. You are never truly alone because God is functioning as your very consciousness right now. When you feel isolated, return to recognition. The infinite presence that I am is my constant companion. I am surrounded by divine love, supported by infinite wisdom, held by eternal consciousness. This is always true, whether you feel it or not. If these challenge-breaking insights give you courage to continue your practice despite obstacles, like this video to strengthen others on the same path, subscribe for advanced spiritual wisdom that sustains your journey, and comment which challenge you are ready to overcome through consistent recognition right now. Now let's explore advanced applications of praying as God in daily life situations. First, consider how this transforms your approach to health challenges. When physical symptoms appear, the old way is panic and immediate focus on the problem. The new way is recognition. The divine body that I am knows only wholeness. Infinite intelligence is governing every cell right now. You do not deny symptoms or refuse medical care. You simply refuse to give symptoms ultimate power or reality. You see them as temporary appearances in consciousness rather than final verdicts on your health. You visit doctors while maintaining your spiritual recognition. You take medicine while knowing that God is the true healing presence working through all channels. This creates an entirely different experience of illness. Instead of fear dominating your consciousness, peace becomes possible even amid symptoms. Instead of feeling victimized by your body, you maintain your spiritual authority. Instead of begging God to fix you, you recognize the wholeness that is already present. Healing may come quickly or gradually, but your consciousness remains stable either way. Joel worked with thousands of people facing serious health challenges. He never told them to reject medical help. He taught them to maintain spiritual consciousness while using every practical resource available. The power is not in rejecting the human, but in recognizing the divine that transcends the human. This is mature spiritual practice. In business and career, praying as God means recognizing that your supply comes from infinite consciousness, not from any job, client, or economic condition. When facing financial pressure, instead of desperate job searching from fear, you practice recognition. Infinite abundance is expressing as my experience right now. Every need is already met in divine reality. This does not mean you sit passively waiting for money to fall from the sky. You take intelligent action, you pursue opportunities, you work diligently. But your inner state is not desperate hustling from lack. It is confident action from spiritual abundance. You work from fullness, not from emptiness. You create from overflow, not from fear. The difference is palpable. People sense when you are operating from desperation versus confidence. Opportunities respond to consciousness. When your inner state is aligned with spiritual abundance, you attract circumstances that reflect that abundance. When your inner state is dominated by lack, you repel the very things you are seeking. Consciousness creates conditions. Joel demonstrated this principle repeatedly. During times of apparent lack, he maintained recognition of infinite supply. Invariably, abundance manifested through unexpected channels. Not because he begged hard enough, but because his consciousness was aligned with spiritual truth. The same principle works for you. Your supply is already present in consciousness, waiting for your recognition to bring it into visible form. In relationships, praying as God transforms how you relate to difficult people. Instead of trying to change them through manipulation, control, or even positive thinking about them, you recognize the divine presence in them. The consciousness that I am and the consciousness that they are is one in God. Only love is real. Only divine harmony is present. This does not mean you tolerate abuse or remain in harmful situations. Spiritual recognition sometimes leads to setting healthy boundaries or ending toxic relationships. But you do so from clarity rather than hatred, from wisdom rather than victimhood. You recognize that the person's behavior is not who they truly are. Their anger, selfishness, or cruelty is a temporary expression of spiritual blindness, not their ultimate reality. When you hold this recognition, something remarkable happens. Either the person's behavior begins to shift, or your ability to handle the situation with peace increases, or circumstances naturally create healthy distance. You are not trying to control outcomes. You are simply maintaining your spiritual awareness regardless of appearances. Joel taught that you cannot heal another person's consciousness through mental manipulation. But you can maintain your own spiritual awareness and refuse to accept the reality of conflict, separation, or hatred. Your clear consciousness becomes a healing presence that impacts the entire situation, even if the specific outcome differs from your original expectation. The most advanced application is recognizing God as your being in moments of crisis. When everything seems to be falling apart, when multiple problems hit simultaneously, when you feel completely overwhelmed, this is when praying as God demonstrates its ultimate power. In the midst of chaos, you return to the one truth. I am the presence of divine peace right now. Not, I wish I had peace, or, God, please give me peace. But peace is what I am because God is what I am. This is not denial of circumstances. This is anchoring in reality that transcends circumstances. The problems may be real on the human level, but they have no power over the divine presence that is your true identity. Joel experienced profound crises in his own life. Health challenges, relationship losses, professional setbacks. In every crisis, he returned to the same recognition. God is present, God is operating, God is the only power. And every crisis eventually revealed itself as an opportunity for deeper spiritual realization. Not because the crisis was good, but because consciousness can find God in any situation. You develop this capacity through practice. You do not wait for crisis to try this approach for the first time. You build your spiritual strength in daily small challenges so that when big challenges come, the practice is already natural. You train your consciousness in peaceful moments so that in chaotic moments, recognition becomes your automatic response rather than panic. As you continue this practice over months and years, something profound happens. Praying as God stops being a technique and becomes your natural state of being. You no longer have to remind yourself that God is present. You simply live from that awareness. You no longer practice recognition as something separate from life. Recognition becomes how you live. This is what Joel called spiritual consciousness. It is not about having mystical experiences or seeing visions or hearing voices. It is about the quiet, steady awareness of divine presence functioning as your individual being. It is about living from truth rather than appearances, from spiritual reality rather than material sense. Your entire life begins reflecting this consciousness. Problems still appear, but they do not control you. Challenges still arise, but they do not define you. Circumstances still fluctuate, but your inner peace remains stable. You are no longer tossed by every wave. You are anchored in the eternal presence that is your true identity. People begin noticing something different about you. Not that you are perfect or problem-free, but that you carry a certain quality of peace, a quiet confidence, a gentle authority. You are not trying to impress anyone. You are simply being who you truly are. This is the natural result of years of recognizing God as your being. The transformation extends beyond your personal life into your impact on others. Without trying, you become a healing presence. Your consciousness affects people around you. When you enter a room, the atmosphere shifts. When you speak truth, people feel it resonate in their own souls. You are not doing this through personal power. Divine consciousness is simply expressing through you. Joel discovered this as his consciousness deepened. People were healed in his presence without him saying a word. Situations resolved themselves when he held spiritual awareness. Problems dissolved as consciousness recognized their unreality. He was not performing miracles. He was simply being the transparency for God that he had become through years of practice. This is available to you as well. Not because you are special, but because God is the only presence. And as you recognize this truth, it becomes visible through your experience. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to have all the answers. You simply need to be faithful to your practice of recognition, day after day, year after year. The world desperately needs people who live from spiritual consciousness rather than material sense. Every person who truly practices these principles becomes a light in the darkness, a healing presence in a world dominated by fear. Your faithfulness to this practice is not just about your personal transformation. It is your contribution to the spiritual evolution of humanity. There will be moments when you forget everything you have learned. Old patterns will resurface. Fear will temporarily dominate. You will find yourself praying to God again, begging for help, feeling separate and powerless. This is normal. This does not mean you have failed. It means you are human, walking a gradual path of awakening. Joel himself had moments of forgetting. In his writings, he honestly shares times when he fell back into material sense, when appearances seemed more real than spiritual truth, when fear gripped him despite his deep understanding. What made him a master was not that he never forgot, but that he always remembered again. He always returned to recognition. You will do the same. When you catch yourself in old patterns, do not condemn yourself. Simply recognize, I forgot for a moment, but now I remember. God is present as my being right now. Nothing has changed in spiritual reality. I am still the expression of divine consciousness, even when I temporarily forgot. And continue your practice. Spiritual growth is not linear. You do not climb steadily upward without setbacks. You move forward, slip backward, move forward again. Over time, the trajectory is upward, but the path includes valleys as well as peaks. The key is consistency, not perfection. The power is in returning to truth, not in never leaving it. This is what happens when you stop praying to God and start praying as God. You discover who you truly are. Not a limited human being begging for scraps from a distant deity, but the very presence of divine consciousness, expressing as individual being, right here, right now. This is your spiritual identity. This is the truth Joel Goldsmith lived and taught. Your life becomes a demonstration of this truth. Not perfect, not problem-free, but rooted in spiritual reality rather than material appearances. You live from presence rather than lack, from wholeness rather than brokenness, from peace rather than fear. You become the answer you have been seeking. The journey continues from here. Every day is an opportunity to deepen your recognition. Every challenge is an invitation to practice spiritual consciousness. Every moment offers the choice. Will you live from separation or from oneness? Will you beg or will you be? Will you pray to God or as God? Choose recognition. Choose presence. Choose the truth of your divine identity. And watch as your entire experience transforms from the inside out. This is not magic. This is not wishful thinking. This is the natural result of aligning consciousness with spiritual reality. This is the power of praying as God. If your spiritual understanding has expanded through these Joel Goldsmith teachings on praying as God rather than to God, like this video to help others discover their true divine identity. Subscribe for more transformative wisdom that awakens consciousness, and comment, I am the presence, to affirm your recognition of the divine being you truly are.